what you see happening socially and environmentally in the United States right now, particularly as election 2016 is coming up, and as you know, the Republican convention is coming up in about 2 weeks on July 18th. What are some of the things that you see happening?
Well, let's see. Not a lot that's good. I mean, there are a lot of problems that are not being addressed by either party. But anyway, I was figuring on,
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
The politicians can pretend it's something else, but Donald Trump calls it radical Islamic terrorism. That's why he's calling for...
Never had it before in recent history.
The only close analogy is the unrest in Chicago at the Democratic Convention in 1968, where there was a confrontation between Mayor Daley's police and some protesters outside that convention.
Right, but that was one-off. That was one incident. And
right.
The Trump rallies, or whatever you call them, his appearances always seem to attract violence.
Do you think it's because of the content of what he represents and what he's saying, because of the policies that he represents, or do you think some of that is instigated by outside agitators, or maybe a little of both?
Well, I've been thinking about it, and, my theory of natural polarization equals repel.
Yes.
And I think that the left has pretty much dominated the political sphere in recent years. And I think the left sees the backlash, the right backlash, which is most of this is what it is. I think the left sees the right as gaining power and becoming equal to them, and equals repel. So I think that's got at least something to do with it. What do you think?
I think that's a very valid observation, and I think that's a pretty accurate assessment. One of the observations that's been made that I do not necessarily agree with, but I'm going to put it out there to get your response and your opinion, has been to compare Trump's rise to the rise of Hitler, and to compare it in terms of similar social and economic conditions, and basically, of course, the implication being that a lot of Trump's policies are fascist. As I say, I'm not putting that out there as a position that I support or agree with. I'm just putting it out there as one of the things that it might have originated with enemies from the left as far as that goes, but that's one of the observations that's being put out there. What would your response be to that?
Well, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. Politicians are demagogues. In any democracy, a politician has to lie to the people. He'll never get elected. Anybody that stands up there and tell the truth will never get, they won't even have a shot of getting elected, because in a democracy, you have to tell the people, you have to promise the people what they want to hear, and tell them, like the old song says, tell her lies and feed her candy, So
you have spoken of democracy in the past, I think, in terms of government of the lowest common denominator, government of the masses. Go into that a little bit about some of the flaws of democracy.
Well, it's well covered in a book called What's Wrong with Democracy, written by a Harvard history professor. And he compares the current state of democracy to Athenian democracy, the ancient Athens, which was the first democracy. And he draws a pretty strong parallel to what's happening today to what happened then. And basically what it is I hate to say this, but most people really don't have sense enough to govern themselves. I mean, I'm sorry, but that's just what I see. It's not their fault. It's not that they're not intelligent people. It's just that when you live in a large group of 300 million people, you don't know what's going on in the rest of the country. You're working at 8 to 5, or maybe 5 to 5, or maybe all around the clock. You know, you're busy working and making a living. So you don't have time to keep up with politics and issues of the day. Yet people are expected to rule themselves and vote on representatives to represent them. They don't have a clue what the issues are. Most people, a lot of people do, but the few people that are intelligent voters are canceled out by the millions and millions of ignorant voters, if you pardon the expression. So therefore, that's whence the term democracy is a government of the lowest common denominator, because the foolish votes will vastly outnumber the wise votes, and they'll vote their own pocketbook every time rather than the future of the country. They'll vote for what's good for me today, what's good for my job, what's going to keep me my job in the immediate future, and so on. It's kind of like letting your kids vote on the budget, or what you're going to, whether or not you're going to take a vacation and where that vacation is going to be, and letting your kids vote on all the household decisions.
That's a good analogy, Henry. Speaking of polarization, what are some of the forces at work in our society right now that you see going head to head at odds with each other right now?
Oh my God, I believe the United States is prime for a civil war. There's more polarization going on today than there was prior to the Civil War, to the American Civil War.
Wow.
In the Civil War, you had, primarily it was just about, the right to govern themselves, the right to make their own decisions about slavery and have their own trade and everything. It was about taxes, primarily about taxes, and there was a lot of the hot issue was the slavery question, and whether slavery would expand westward or be contained to the south. And but basically that was pretty much it. There was polarization between the North and the South. But today you have polarization between men and women, gay and straight, Republican and Democrat, millennials versus the old people. There's polarization all over the map, and not the least of which is the polarization between men and women, which is an artificial polarization, or in other words, an equals repels situation, which is what I believe is leading to the death of the institution of marriage, not marriage itself, but the institution. Yeah, we got a lot of polarization, and the violence that you see in these political rallies is, I believe, a symptom of that polarization.
The potential for that to grow much larger and really get out of hand is there, and I think Henderson last year was a good example of that there's sort of a powder keg waiting to go off, and then many different social and economic issues are involved. It's not going to take very much to trigger it, is it?
Right. The polarization between the the rich and the poor is greater than it ever has been.
And it's developed and evolved exponentially in the past few decades. It really accelerated, I would say, in the past 30 years.
Absolutely. As machines take over the workforce, take the jobs, and then more people born every day that needs a job, I mean, that's a train wreck fixing to happen right there.
Absolutely. What do you?
I don't see anything good. Really, I don't see anything good to report, except the internet seems to be slowly spreading knowledge about some of these issues. The news media sure isn't going to address it. They're only going to address the topics that they're hot right now today, and they're not going to dig any deeper than that.
Well, and many point to a media bias with certain networks, a political bias in one direction or another, and some of them, of course, will deny that. But then some of them, I think it's pretty obvious that there's a slant, either toward liberal left or in some instances maybe a slant toward the right. But any network is going to be slanted somewhat in their news and in their reporting of it, and even in what gets reported. And I think that there are those able to some extent, whether they're the powerful sponsors and the big corporations or whoever they may be, those who wield sufficient influence to suppress or downplay certain stories. I would even allege that much of our news, to some extent, it's controlled. I don't think everything gets reported. I don't think everything gets seen. I think there's a level of control being exercised, maybe not to the extent of George Orwell's 1984 yet. We still have a considerable amount of freedom of the press, but I think there's very definitely very little investigative reporting going on like there was 30 years ago. That's been stated over and over again by people in the news business that's just missing. A lot of reports now are just a rubber stamp press release straight from some corporation, and the reporters aren't doing their homework to challenge it, investigate it, question it, or anything like that. And that's, my book about eBay, to expose some of the evils that eBay came about, because nobody in the news media is doing it, and they're not the only corporation. Monsanto would be a very good example, and we could just go down the list. There's a lot of Fortune 500 companies that have some very serious dirt that needs to be reported to the public, and it's not always getting there. Well, thank God for the internet. Some of it's getting reported that way, as you know, through Facebook groups and through independent news organizations that are not part of the network affiliates. But we really do have a situation where some of the news is somewhat manipulated and controlled.
I totally agree. Here's the thing. We had a two-party system in this country, and the way I see it is we work the system, they have the party. The left and the right has got, they work hand in glove to divide the people, the neocon warmongers on the right and the socialist, what do you call them, communists on the left. When all is said and done, they're all working for the same corporations, and the corporations, mostly the same people, own all the corporations. A few years ago, all the independent news organizations was bought out. The FCC changed the rules and allowed corporate conglomerates to buy up all the news organizations. So most of the news organizations are run by just a few people. Rupert Murdoch, what's his name? Excuse me, I got somebody at the door here. Hey, come on in.
Well, Ted Turner for a while was big with CNN. I guess may still be in.
Yeah, I was trying to think of Ted Turner. I'm getting old. I can't remember. Just a second.
Okay, by all means. Our guest tonight is Henry BAXLEY, and we're discussing polarization in the United States, current factionalization.
He's a guy that's going to take my dog for a walk.
Okay, by all means.
And so go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I was just telling our listeners what you were discussing tonight, the polarization aspect of American society right now, and politics 2016, and everything that's the unrest that is all over the place. And it's a pivotal year. I think there's going to not only be rioting in front of the Republican convention, but I think we can look for the same thing to probably happen at the Democratic convention as well this year.
I think you may be right. You may absolutely be correct. There's within each group there are factions that are against each other. You know what I mean? You heard the saying, "Politics makes strange bedfellows."
Yeah.
Misha, please.
Henry, looking at world politics for a moment, in one of your groups, you've spoken a little bit about Putin and about the ways in which the stage is very easily set for the possibility of a World War III to break out. What are some of the things that you see going on in that particular region?
Well, the neocons, they're chomping at the bit for a war with Russia and China.
Uh-huh.
I mean, the guy that just resigned from the head of NATO, General what's-his-face, the one that just resigned.
Uh-huh.
He's talking about he was a war hawk from the A to Z, and and even Obama, he's promised to bring the boys home and close Guantanamo Bay and this and that and the other. Of course, you've got to understand politicians lie.